Okay, I think we're good. I think we're good. Oh!
Was it filming when it tilted?
Yeah. I hate this setup so much. I need to, like, actually invest money into this super lucrative YouTube channel. Hi. Today, we are going to be bitching some more about some Babysitters Club. Today we're doing number 57, Dawn Saves the Planet.
This is probably the most hated book out of the entire Babysitters Club franchise, but we're here to offer the controversial opinion that this book is not that bad.
It's fine.
Before you stop the video, before you hit dislike, just hear us out here.
Are there any, like, Dawn Saves the Planet haters watching this right now?
I mean, I think pretty much everybody's a Dawn Saves the Planet hater except us two. Basically, Dawn has to do a science project about environmentalism. She decides that her project is going to be an ecology class for the neighborhood kids, so she's doing this with Stacy as her project partner, and she just gets more and more into it and
goes a little off the deep end.
Yeah.
But it's okay because she realizes that she was being kind of obnoxious and tones it down a bit. So the first thing I wanted to say, I really liked the message that the book presents at the very end. It's a good lesson that I think you can still employ as an adult, and it's basically that in order to save the planet, you have to start in your own community. So at the end of the book, Dawn's fundraiser for an environmental organization ends up donating the proceeds to the school's recycling program. If you donate to someplace local, then you're more likely to actually do something that's helpful.
That philosophy can also be applied to stuff that's not environmentalism. I think a parallel would be like calling out a microaggression of some sort.
You don't have to, like, write a big think piece for everyone to read, but as long as you are doing things in your home, in your immediate circle to change things, then eventually the whole world will change. So I really liked the optimism at the end of the book, and I thought that was real sweet. Let's get right into what everyone hates about this book, and that is Dawn's activism. As I was reading this book, I found that Dawn's approach to environmentalism was very, like, all or nothing, which is quite similar to how people approach a lot of issues in our current society. For example, the whole plastic straw thing, which I totally get. It's like, yeah, of course we shouldn't be using plastic straws if we can afford to buy reusable straws.
But then there are people who actually need plastic straws.
Yeah, exactly. But then people were just being jerks about it.
And ableist jerks.
Exactly. And it was just a big mess. So I kind of feel like that kind of all or nothing approach that Dawn experiences is similar to a lot of activism that is still happening today.
Yeah.
So I guess we haven't learned much.
Reading it kind of reminded me of the whole debate about calling people out versus calling people in.
Instead of belittling somebody for saying something horribly offensive, try to teach them why it's horribly offensive and help them to understand that kind of thing.
Yeah, if you think the person would be receptive to that. Towards the end of the book, she realizes that she's probably gone too hard. But then again, like, reading this as an adult, like, I can kind of see how she got to the point of being so extreme in her views is because, like, when she first brings up the issues, she said something to Claudia about how she should have used, like, a reusable Tupperware or something like that. And then, like, her friends are, like, they just kind of laugh at her. They're like, oh yeah, ha ha ha.
Yeah,
they don't really take her seriously.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can kind of see why she'd get pushed towards being more extreme just because she feels like people aren't listening to her. There's actually a spot in the book where she calls out Shauna, who coincidentally is the same Shauna from Claudia and the Middle School Mystery, who cheated off of Claudia's math test. Dawn calls her out for having a bunch of styrofoam containers in her locker, and Points for continuity, Shauna's locker is still next to Dawn's in this book. I was impressed by that. But anyway, yeah, so Dawn just kind of like follows her down the school, like being like, he's like, why are you using so much styrofoam? This is like hurting the environment. And then Shauna's just being a bitch to her. And then like Dawn just like rips her a new one.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And people are like, oh, Dawn's so crazy, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, Shauna deserved that. Like, I think people read this book and forget who Shauna is.
The whole thing where Dawn is trying to introduce the idea of environmentalism to her friends, and her friends are just being super unresponsive and are laughing about it. Like, I totally can get why she would get super pushy all of a sudden, because she tried the nice approach and people were still jerks about it.
Yeah.
So she went for the more aggressive approach, which she realizes at the end was probably not the greatest idea.
Yeah.
And she definitely is able to dial it back and use her knowledge to benefit the student body. So the main theme of this book is environmentalism, which was referred to as being ecology. And we were thinking about how talking about ecology then has changed from how people talk about it now.
Yeah, so this book was published in 1992. Basically, this book was, parts of it were written kind of to be educational for kids. So they talk about things like recycling, water pollution, picking up your garbage. It's all very individualized, whereas I feel like today a lot of that stuff is kind of grouped under the whole umbrella of climate change and conservation. It's interesting because greenhouse gases are only mentioned once in this whole book, and Dawn mentions it when she's ripping Shauna a new one.
Yes.
But they don't really link it to climate change, and I actually Googled this. I didn't do a whole lot of in-depth research, but from what I found was that the first paper that really linked human greenhouse gases to climate change was only published in 1988. So I feel like maybe it wasn't yet in the public consciousness in 1992.
No, definitely not.
And one thing that they also talk about in here, which people don't really talk about as much anymore, is acid rain. Now that I think about it, I remember them talking about acid rain a lot on a lot of kids' TV shows. And,
I remember in elementary school we had to do like posters about acid rain for a science project. Yeah, it was something that people talked about a lot, but now it's not as much of an issue in North America, at least.
Yeah, I think I read that acid rain has been reduced by like 60% since the 90s.
So that's nice.
One thing that's not a raging dumpster fire.
Ha! But yeah, I think it's interesting because back in the day, they focused a lot on what you can do to save the world. But now it's like a lot of people do the things that they talk about in the book. Like they use reusable containers, stuff like that. So now the main thing that people are trying to focus on is getting corporations to make green steps, because no matter how much we do as people, the corporations that are giving us food and everything are contributing most of the pollution in the atmosphere. So they're really the ones who should be making radical changes, because no matter how many times we buy reusable straws, we're still not gonna change as much as like a company that decides not to use coal or something. Yeah. But I think it's still important to do the individual stuff. Yeah. It's just not gonna be that drastic compared to what could be done. Okay, now is the fun topic. Why is this book so hated?
This was actually either the first or the second Babysitter's Club book I ever read. I think I was in grade 3 or grade 4, and this wasn't my favorite book that I read from the series, but I at least liked it enough to want to keep reading more of the series. I would go so far as to say that some of the hate for this book is actually internalized misogyny, but we will get to that.
So one of the things that we think is the reason why a lot of people dislike this book is because of the topic of environmentalism. Environmentalism is often grouped with being liberal,
left-wing.
Yeah.
There was even, I looked at the Goodreads review page for this book, and there was even somebody on there who referred to Dawn's ecology classes as being indoctrination. I'm like, well, I know who you voted for.
Fuck you, by the way. So the other thing is definitely some sexism, either internalized misogyny or just flat out misogyny. I'm sure that there were some boys who read these books. Dawn, being a young girl who has a very strong opinion, could be seen as being threatening.
Aggressive.
Yeah, and aggressive to a lot of readers, and that might be why they don't like the book.
I think that had the opposite effect on me, because when I read this, I was a very shy kid. And Dawn just didn't give a damn about what anybody thought about her. She just, like, said whatever was on her mind. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, I don't think that was my conscious thought process as to liking this book, but I think that may have been a contributing factor.
Yeah, well, I think in general there's a lot of pressure in media for female characters to be, like, perfect all the time and to, like, be super nice and super hot, but also not too hot. Dawn is a real person in these books. Like, she is flawed, she makes mistakes, she's very aggressive in some
And she
points.
did learn from her mistakes, which I think people overlook a lot.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, I would rather read a book about a female character who makes constant mistakes, but learns something from what she went through and becomes a better person because of that. Like, that to me is way more interesting than just a character just being perfect the whole time. It's just so unfair, because if Dawn were a male character, I can guarantee that most people would be like, oh yeah, he's like such a strong, independent guy, and like,
yeah,
he's super confident and we love him.
I even read some people speculating that this book is the reason why Dawn got written out of the series eventually, and I actually Googled it just to figure out if there was any truth to that. I couldn't find anything. If that is the reason why they wrote her out of the series, I think that is awful. It's like, oh, a girl with an opinion, we can't have that, she has to go.
The other babysitters, they also have strong personalities in part, but for some reason Dawn's activism combined with the aggressiveness made her too unlikable for people. I don't know. I really like Dawn, honestly, and I totally felt for her when her friends were being annoying about her trying to tell them something important and them just laughing her off. I'm having middle school war flashbacks. So, a running question that we've been asking ourselves the last few books is, are there any good teachers at Stony Brook Middle? And the answer so far is still no. So, in this book, we've got two teachers who started the book seeming pretty reasonable.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, cool.
And then they kind of lose their way along the way, but then they come back and are okay. So, you know, it's a rocky roller. So basically there's Mrs. Gonzalez, and she's doing the environmentalism unit in the science class, and when Dawn approaches her about this idea that she has about the classes, she's super receptive and everything, and eventually the classes spiral into a green fair that'll help raise money. She also starts thinking about doing like a recycling program with the middle school, and so Mrs. Gonzalez is like yes to all of this. So then when the time comes for the recycling plant at the middle school to be launched, Mrs. Gonzalez takes all the credit.
There's this weird plot point in the book where like they announce that they're gonna have this recycling center, and then they get the student body to vote on who they want to run the recycling program, which is fine, but then like the choices that they had were like A, Dawn, B, Mrs. Gonzalez, or C, and then some other name. I'm like, why would you do that? Like,
of course people are gonna pick the teacher.
Yeah, it's like, it was just such a strange, it seemed a little contrived just to have that conflict, but anyway.
Whatever. So people pick Mrs. Gonzalez, and then the principal,
the vice principal.
Yeah, whatever.
I think. I don't know.
Who cares? So he, at the launching of the recycling center, he gets up there and he's like, none of this would have been possible without Mrs. Gonzalez. And Dawn is just like...
Even Marianne is there. Marianne's great in this book, by the way. Marianne has redeemed herself.
Yeah, she's a really good friend.
Yeah, and when they're like, and thanks to Mrs. Gonzalez, and then everyone's clapping, and then Marianne says, but what about Dawn?
Oh, I know, it's so sweet. And then Dawn feels really bad.
You should give credit where credit is due.
Yeah, like, the least that he could have done was say, like, a student had this idea, Dawn Schaefer, and then Mrs. Gonzalez is running the plant, so none of it would have been possible without the two of them. I don't know why he didn't say that.
They just erase her out of the
narrative.
Yeah, which is really awful. And
yeah.
Dawn suspects it's because they think she's been too aggressive, which is also awful.
Yeah, that's like such a terrible thing to teach a child, is that they shouldn't be opinionated, because if they are, it's gonna result in negative consequences.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a terrible lesson to teach some students during their extremely vulnerable years.
Yeah. This is not a 10 out of 10 would fire, but this is like a 10 out of 10 would
give a stern talking to.
Yeah.
At the end of the book, Mrs. Gonzalez offers to give Dawn a column to write basically about environmentalism that will be distributed for the students, and the students agree that that's a great idea, so Dawn still gets to participate, but she doesn't have to worry about being the responsible person, which I think is better, because she's 12, like...
13.
Whatever. She's too young!
I feel like there's gonna be a bunch of moments in this where I just, like, correct you on things, you're like, whatever.
I don't care! I'm tired! As I was reading this book, I was thinking about potential sequels. I think that if somebody were to write a Babysitter Club fanfiction in 2018 based on this book, it would be called Dawn Punches Nazis. We know that Dawn would punch a Nazi.
Yeah, she definitely would.
Yeah, so embrace your inner Dawn and punch the next Nazi you see.
Dawn's the hero we need in this world.
Truly! Anyway, this has been a more politically charged video.
Whatever, this is a politically charged book.
That's very true.
Anything involving environmentalism is going to be politically charged.
Exactly. So I hope you guys enjoyed us getting heated talking about environmentalism.
If you don't like hearing about politics, that means you're privileged.
Exactly. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion.
I hope you don't lose any subscribers.
I lose subscribers by breathing, so like whatever. We'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.